Morning, everyone. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to, at all times, protect the health, the safety, the national security, and the economic well-being of the American people. As part of that responsibility, we need each and every year to pass a bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. The National Defense Authorization Act legislation pending before the Congress advanced out of the Armed Services Committee on a strongly bipartisan vote, 57-1, and contained the types of provisions that earned bipartisan support in order to make sure that we had the military readiness necessary to protect the American people in an increasingly dangerous world. The National Defense Authorization Act advanced out of the Armed Services Committee 57-1 and laid a foundation to be able to move bipartisan legislation through the House of Representatives. But the extreme MAGA Republicans are not interested in governing. They do not care about the health, the safety, the national security, and the economic well-being of the American people. And so they have hijacked the National Defense Authorization Act in order to jam their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people. Extreme MAGA Republicans are trying to, once again, march us toward a nationwide abortion ban and restrict the reproductive freedom of women serving in the military. Extreme MAGA Republicans are once again attacking the LGBTQ plus community with a particular focus on bullying transgender children. Something is really wrong with these individuals. Extreme MAGA Republicans want to undermine principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the military when Black and Latino citizens of the United States of America disproportionately serve in uniform. Something is really wrong with these individuals on the other side of the aisle. They are not serious about governing. Instead, all they care about is bending the knee to Donald Trump. Questions?
In any event.
Chad, it would be you who would want to bring up the ball game.
Or the next, but that's in any event. There have been some Democrats really hammering the Supreme Court, questioning the ethics of Justices Alito and Thomas. There was a proposal by Senator Blumenthal yesterday encouraging the Chief Justice of the United States to restrict Justice Alito from authoring majority opinions, from presiding over his circuit. Do you think that that is a push too far? And are Democrats trying to make some political hay about this because, as you allude to, the abortion decision and everything, some Democrats and some on the left think Court is toxic?
The American people almost uniformly agree that the right-wing justices on the Supreme Court are completely and totally out of control. It appears that Justice Alito is an insurrectionist sympathizer, joined by his right-wing buddy, Clarence Thomas. I have been on record making it clear that Justices Alito and Thomas, who have a clear conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest, which is what federal statute indicates is the standard for recusal, should have no role in deciding any case that relates to the violent insurrection that took place on January 6th, incited by former President Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Now, on Wednesday, you met with Usher to discuss type 1 diabetes screening. meetings. What came out of that meeting, and in your opinion, why is it important that the Screen for Type 1 Diabetes Act pass?
Well, it was a wonderful opportunity to sit and talk with Usher, who has chosen to come to the Hill and travel to other parts of the country to use his experience as a father of a child with type 1 diabetes to elevate the importance of screening, identification, and treatment so that anyone faced with the challenges that arise from a health perspective in connection with type 1 diabetes have the awareness and then the capacity to seek the treatment necessary to live a life of dignity and respect. I'm thankful as well for the leadership of Representative Kim Schreier, who is partnering in a bipartisan way with Representative David Joyce to advance the legislation, and I look forward to standing completely behind it. Usher's presence on Capitol Hill, meeting with stakeholders on both sides of the Capitol, will help advance and elevate the importance of type 1 diabetes screening. And hopefully we can find a way to get the legislation over the finish line sooner rather than later. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Going back to the Supreme Court, we're approaching the one-year anniversary of the student loan decision, the decision to overturn President Biden's student loan program and affirmative action. Can you just speak to the impact on everyday Americans? I know you travel the country a lot. I know you speak to members a lot. Can you just kind of crystallize the impact of those two decisions over the last year on everyday Americans as it pertains to student loan debt and affirmative action?
The extremists on the Supreme Court have decided that they're going to carry out an ideological crusade to undermine basic American principles related to a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions, President Biden's ability to provide student loan debt relief to millions of young people of every race across the country, and the Supreme Court has chosen to undermine the ability of our institutions of higher learning to have a diverse student body that reflects the diversity of the nation and, of course, the world. The Supreme Court and its right-wing majority is clearly out of control and out of step with the American people, which is why its approval rating is even lower than that of the United States Congress. Clearly, work needs to be done to rein in the Supreme Court, particularly as it relates to its inability to police itself with respect to ethics. In terms of the aggressively partisan right-wing extreme decisions that have been rolling out of the Supreme Court that was stacked by justices nominated by Donald Trump, the American people will have a full opportunity to evaluate the adverse impact that the Supreme Court has had electorally in November. In fact, the Supreme Court, in its decision in Dobbs, which detonated Roe v. Wade, made clear that women in this country have a political voice and they expect that it could be exercised at the ballot box. Women have a political voice, young people have a political voice, communities of color have a political voice, the American people have a political voice, and it will be exercised on November 5th.
Your colleagues back in the Senate talking about the Gaza pier, they're saying that it's just not working. Republicans are saying President Biden needs to take a different angle with this. Soldiers are being put in harm's way. Some have been hurt. It's humanitarian aid is being taken by Hamas. What's the House Democrats' reaction to all this? And should President Biden take a different angle?
The most important thing that can be done at this point is for the peace plan that was put into the public domain by President Joe Biden, which has the support of the United Nations Security Council and had previously secured the unanimous support of Israel's War Council, meaning it has the type of credible affirmation by important stakeholders in the Middle East and across the world, such that we have a real opportunity to create a path toward a just and lasting peace. The peace plan, in its first phase of 3, would allow for an immediate ceasefire, lock in the military gains that have been made by the Israeli Defense Forces in its effort to decisively defeat Hamas, allow for humanitarian assistance to be surged immediately and consistently on behalf of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and quite importantly, provide a path so that every single hostage can be returned. Instead of always trying to politicize an issue, which is what is being done by my Senate Republican colleagues with respect to a matter of important foreign policy, perhaps the extreme MAGA Republicans should be leaning in to lifting up the peace plan that has significant stakeholder support. It's also important to note that the obstacle to peace right now is the failure of Hamas negotiators to agree to a peace plan that has support all across the region, including amongst Arab partners in Egypt and Qatar.
Hey, leader. I talked to Congressman Glenn Thompson earlier. He was talking about the progress made with the Farm Bill. Came across with large bipartisan support. Obviously, there's been talk in the Senate as well about their version. Can you tell me about Democrats with their priorities when it came to the Farm Bill? And after that, can you also touch on
G.K. Thompson thinks the Farm Bill came out of his committee with large bipartisan support. That, in fact, is an inaccurate statement, but no surprise. The Farm Bill that emerged from the Ag Committee was decisively opposed by the overwhelming majority of House Democrats because it was a highly partisan farm bill that would cut $30 billion in food and nutritional assistance, largely and disproportionately impacting children and veterans. That partisan farm bill is dead on arrival. No one believes with any degree of credibility that the farm bill that emerged out of the Ag Committee has a shot on the House floor or in the United States Senate. It's time for House Republicans to get serious about legislating, because these reckless legislative joyrides that we are now seeing with the National Defense Authorization Act, as well as the Farm Bill, have no shot, zero shot of being enacted into law. Why are we wasting time when we should be solving real problems for the American people and building a healthy economy? That's what House Democrats are all about. But unfortunately, many of my Republican colleagues continue to play reckless, unnecessary political games.
To follow up on that, though, is there something that would make it more appealing for you, or there's the need to be more prioritization for these programs or for farmers?
We are not going to allow draconian cuts to food and nutritional assistance programs for the American people that are designed to benefit children and veterans to go forward. And we are not going to allow extreme MAGA Republicans to devastate our ability to address the climate crisis with the fierce urgency of now, which is also part of the extreme MAGA Republican objective. Why? Because many of them have been sent to Congress to do the bidding of big oil. The only way that a farm bill is going to advance into law is for the four corners to sit down and have a bipartisan discussion led by Senator Stabenow in partnership with Representative David Thompson David Scott, just making sure you guys were paying attention, in partnership with David Scott in order to arrive at bipartisan common ground.
Going back to the NDAA, do you have any plans to try and meet with Republican leadership in the coming days, coming weeks? And if so, what would that meeting look like? What do you want to communicate to them about the NDAA?
With respect to the National Defense Authorization Act, we are ready, willing, and able to have a discussion about moving a bipartisan bill that meets the needs of America's military and protects our national security. It's time for the extreme MAGA Republicans to abandon the effort to jam their right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people. These Republican amendments that have been attached to the National Defense Authorization Act are completely out of control. 192 Republicans voted to restore a Confederate monument to Arlington National Cemetery, including Representative D'Esposito, Representative Molinaro, and Representative Williams from New York. What is the rationale? In a time where America is facing a dangerous world with challenges all across the globe, to decide you want to restore a Confederate monument to Arlington National Cemetery. What tradition are extreme MAGA Republicans, including Representative D'Esposito, Representative Molinaro, and Representative Williams upholding? What Confederate tradition are you upholding? Is it slavery, rape, kidnap, Jim Crow, lynching, racial oppression, or all of the above? What exactly is the Confederate tradition that extreme MAGA Republicans in 2024 are upholding, and you want to use the National Defense Authorization Act to turn back the clock on progress that has been made in the United States of America? Is shameful.
Yesterday, President Trump returned, had his meetings with House Republicans and Senate Republicans. You were there on January 6th. You were huddled, as was all of them who were in the chamber at the time, in safety from the insurrectionists. What was it like for you personally to see some of these people that you saw that day come back and greet Trump as a conquering hero?
It was shameful and a complete embarrassment that my extreme MAGA Republican colleagues decided to welcome the insurrectionist in chief back to the Capitol as a conquering hero, not someone who lied about the 2020 presidential election and incited a violent mob to attack the Capitol in order to halt the peaceful transfer of power. The Republican Party no longer exists in its traditional form. This is the Trump Party. And it's not focused on solving problems for the American people. It is focused singularly on doing the bidding of Donald Trump. And there is no bottom. There is no low. There is no value that the extreme MAGA Republicans aren't willing to abandon in service of Donald Trump. And that's very unfortunate. But they're going to have to defend this approach that they've taken over the next several months in advance of November before the American people. The fate of this country and the fate of our democracy, the fate of reproductive freedom, the fate of Social Security, the fate of Medicare, the fate of the Affordable Care Act are in the hands of the American people.
Yeah, kind of along those lines, Speaker Johnson's headed back up to your city in the suburbs very soon for a series of fundraisers for those moderate Republicans. They call themselves moderates. Is there any drag, given along the lines you just expressed, on those Republicans with ties to Speaker Johnson?
The drag on the so-called moderate Republicans in New York will be the anchor of the extremism with respect to reproductive freedom, Donald Trump, and the other right-wing votes that they continue to take here in Washington, but try to hide from the American people and the electorate they are supposed to serve in New York.
Is Speaker Johnson in drag himself on that?
That's a question that New Yorkers will have to decide, and I'm certain that that's going to be litigated.
Thanks. Going back to the Supreme Court for a second, another decision that could come around the corner any moment has to do with the Chevron test, and kind of depending on what the Supreme Court decides there, that could change how specific Congress has to be with respect to what it delegates to regulatory bodies and what isn't. Have you given any thought to how that might change the job of Congress here, and how big of a change would that be in your view?
To the extent that the Chevron doctrine is undermined or eliminated, it will provide another example of the MAGA extremist movement, including on the United States Supreme Court, trying to jam their right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people, often in an undemocratic fashion, as opposed to allowing the elected representatives of the people of this country in partnership with the elected administration to enact public policy. We are witnessing significant judicial overreach led by right-wing extremists on the Supreme Court, and the American people reject it. It's one of the reasons why Democrats, in election after election after election, since the fall of Roe v. Wade in 2022, are winning. And overperforming, as was the case in Ohio, when the Democratic Party didn't even contest the race in the most recent special election. And yet we saw a 26-point overperformance by a Democratic candidate who spent $25,000 against a well-known Republican state senator who spent over $700,000. And it was the most recent of many examples of what is likely to come in November. Last question.
There's a number of members of your caucus who are signaling that they will skip Prime Minister Netanyahu's joint address next month and perhaps even hold counter-programming. Do you support their decision to do so?
As I've repeatedly said, as is the case with respect to any joint address to Congress, every individual member will make a decision as to whether they will participate or not participate. Thanks.
identity of Trump. What do you say to these voters, and could you court some of them if you're putting them in this category of being extreme MAGA Republicans? How do you kind of pitch that to voters who might come on the Democratic team?
We are not saying to traditional Republicans or conservatives to leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party has left them. The extreme MAGA Republican movement is different than the traditional Republican movement, which is why you're seeing traditional Republicans leave the Congress, leave the Republican Party, or indicate that in 2024 they're going in a different direction. Thanks.
Thank you.
Somebody's killing poor people, and it's going on now.
When COVID happened, poor people were dying at a rate already of 800 people a day. Before COVID, if you went to a funeral every single day, it would take you 600 years to attend all the funerals of the people who will die from the ravages of policy violence, poverty, and low wages in America in just 1 year. It would take you 2 years and 19 days to go to all of the funerals of the people that will die today, and oftentimes silence. Nobody talks about this political genocide, but we are determined today to remember their death and be a resurrection of voting power and voice power like never before.
Economic justice and saving this democracy are deeply connected. We, as a nation, must listen to the demands of the poor, who are pushing and will continue to push political candidates and elected leaders to lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise.
We are the poor, the marginalized, and the underpaid. And we are taking one step forward to say that everybody has a right to live.
Poverty is not the fault of those who are impoverished. It is caused by those who make the policy.
There are over 135 million poor and low-wage, low-income people in this nation.
The biggest block of potential voters by far is low-income, low-wage voters.
I can't afford medicine. Sometimes I have to skip because of the cost.
The farm worker community is tired of the violence imposed upon us by greed, exclusion, and denial of basic human rights.
Those folk that represented by that casket, poor and low-wage workers who are the most moral people in this country because they go to work every day believing, even though going to work is hazardous to their health.
I'm tired of working 70 to 80 hours a week and still not have money for the necessity of bills. I'm tired of getting sick and not being able to go see the doctor. Having to make a choice to pay between rent or the light bill or food or clothes.
You cannot claim to care about families and a culture of life and then do everything in your power to rob people of equal access to resources and to force them to live in poverty.
Leadership of both parties had waged war on poor people and low-wage workers.
And this government has treated people experiencing poverty, including their military families, with disdainful, deliberate, malicious neglect.
So the truth is that my son died from poverty.
We refuse to accept poverty as the fourth leading cause of death.
The fourth leading cause of death in this, the richest country in the world.
We march today for our children and the generations to come.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
We will voice our demands and register our vote.
When we stand up and when we stand together, things change.
There is the electorate that is, and then there is the electorate that should be.
34 million eligible poor and low-income voters did not vote in 2016. If just 20% of those voters in swing states were mobilized around an agenda, they could change the political outcome of every election. So we're launching the most massive voter mobilization and turnout campaign in history of poor and low-wage voters, allies, and religious leaders.
People are dying, but we know It doesn't have to be this way. And so we are calling on everyone to join us in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival.
We are here, we will be seen, we will be heard, and our power will be felt. We don't need to be an insurrection. We are a resurrection that will be felt across this country. Are you ready? 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 We are a resurrection, and we are ready.